So, you've probably heard of the Boston Tea Party, right? It's one of those things we all learn in history class. But, it's way more than just a fact in a textbook. It's this incredible story about protest, about what's fair, and how something as simple as tea could literally spark a revolution. Let's get into it. And think about that feeling for a second. That's the key to this whole story. That's exactly where the American colonists were back in 1773. They felt like they were being backed into a corner, completely pushed to their limits. And they decided, you know what? Enough is enough. It was time to do something big, something risky, just to make sure somebody was listening. So how in the world did we get from angry colonists to a harbor full of tea? Well, it was a slow burn, a rebellion that had been simmering for a while. And you've got to understand, this whole thing was never really about the tea. Nope, it was about something much, much bigger, a core principle of fairness. All right, let's rewind a bit to set the stage. The year is 1763. Britain, they just won a huge war, the French and Indian War, but it was incredibly expensive. They're staring at a massive pile of debt. So they look over at the American colonies and basically say, hey, you guys should help us pay for this. And, well, that's where all the trouble really kicks off. And that's when you start hearing this phrase everywhere, no taxation without representation. It became the colonists' rallying cry, and honestly, it perfectly sums up their whole argument. I mean, think about it. The idea was simple. The colonists didn't have a single person representing them in the British Parliament, not one voice. So their big question was, how can you tax us when we have zero say in the government that's making the rules? To them, it wasn't just unfair, it felt like straight-up theft. And Britain just kept pushing. This wasn't just a one-and-done thing. First, you get the Sugar Act in '64. The next year, boom, the Stamp Act. Then a couple of years later, the Townshends Act. Every single new tax was met with more and more protest. But London just kept turning up the heat. You can just imagine the frustration building up year after year after year. And then we get to the final straw, the Tea Act of 1773. Now here's the crazy part, the thing that really pushed them over the edge. It wasn't even a new tax. Instead, Britain got clever. They tried something a little more subtle, a little more sneaky, and in the eyes of the colonists, that made it way more dangerous. Okay, so here's how it worked. The Tea Act basically gave one giant company, the British East India Company, a complete and total monopoly. They could now sell their tea directly in America, cutting out all the local colonial merchants. This made their tea cheaper, sure, but it was designed to do one thing: crush the local businesses and force the colonists to basically admit that Parliament was in charge. It wasn't about cheap tea. It was a power play, pure and simple, just dressed up as a good deal. So now you've got colonists whose businesses, whose very livelihoods are on the line. Not to mention their core beliefs about fairness. They decided they had to do something. So let's get into what happened on that one cold December night and how all that pent-up frustration exploded into a carefully planned act of defiance. So, picture this. It's December 16th, 1773. Down in Boston Harbor, you have 3 ships just sitting there: the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. And their cargo holds are packed to the brim with tea, the very symbol of everything the colonists were fighting against. The clock was ticking. They had a choice to make: either let that tea get unloaded or make a statement that nobody could ignore. This is where the Sons of Liberty come in, and they had a plan. And let's be clear, this was not some chaotic, spur-of-the-moment riot. Oh no, this was an organized operation. First step, disguise themselves as Native Americans to hide who they were. Second step, get on board those 3 ships. And the final step, destroy the tea by dumping every last bit of it into the water. This was a direct assault on British property, and it was meant to send a message that was loud, clear, and absolutely unmistakable. And wow, did they ever send that message. We are talking about 342 massive chests of tea getting chucked overboard. To put that in perspective, in today's money, that's over $1 million worth of damage. This wasn't just a little protest. This was a massive act of financial sabotage. It showed just how far they were willing to go. Right. You don't just destroy $1 million worth of property and expect nothing to happen. King George and the British Parliament, they were furious, absolutely livid, and their response was designed to be fast, harsh, and to completely stamp out this rebellious spirit in Massachusetts once and for all. So Britain passes these new laws. Officially, they're called the Coercive Acts,
But the colonists, they called them the Intolerable Acts. And when you see what they did, you'll get why. First, they completely shut down Boston Harbor, cutting off the city's main source of income, until the tea was paid for. Then, they basically took away Massachusetts' right to govern itself. They even made a rule that any British official accused of a crime would be sent back to Britain for trial. And, the cherry on top, they forced colonists to let British soldiers live in their homes. This wasn't policy. This was punishment.
But here's the beautiful, incredible irony of it all. Britain's whole plan backfired spectacularly. They were trying to isolate Massachusetts, to punish them and make them an example for everyone else. But what actually happened? The other colonies looked at what was happening and thought, if they can do that to Massachusetts, they can do that to us. So instead of dividing the colonies, Britain accidentally gave them a common enemy and united all 13 of them like never before. So, what's the big takeaway here? What's the lasting legacy of this one wild night of protest? Well, the Boston Tea Party became so much more than just an event. It grew into this powerful, enduring symbol of defiance that still means something to us today. When you really break it down, the Boston Tea Party is a perfect example of what we call civil disobedience. I mean, think about it. It was a planned, peaceful towards people anyway, breaking of a law that they truly believed was unjust. And they knew there would be consequences, but they were willing to face them because they were fighting for a greater good, their right to have a say in their own lives. When you look at the big picture, the Tea Party really did change everything. It was the spark that united the colonies. It led directly to them forming the First Continental Congress to decide what to do next. It was, without a doubt, a huge step on the road to the American Revolution, and it became this powerful, timeless symbol of what it means to stand up to unfair rule. And that brings us back to that really big question, the same one the colonists had to answer. It's a question that's just as real today as it was back then. They made a choice. They chose to break the law because they believed in a higher principle. And yeah, it changed the world. But it leaves us all to wonder, when is breaking the law the right thing to do? When does it stop being just an option and maybe, just maybe, become a duty?